You guys have heard me say a lot lately, I do it for the movement. Why do I do it? Why do I do this thing I'm doing right now on camera? And I'll mention I'm making the time to do this right now, today, after being bedridden ill again. I've been very sick at the moment. If I look sick, it's because I am sick. And I'm going to try to get back to the gym tonight. And I'm packing up to leave town. I have a lot going on in my life that really should take priority over YouTube. Among the accusations against me lately that I thought fell flat, someone reproached me by saying that I'm making these videos for gain, for personal gain. And from my perspective, that's a laughable claim. I used to be able to say there's absolutely no money for me YouTube. Now you can go to my Patreon page and see exactly how little money is in it. There is a financial aspect to what I'm doing on YouTube, but I don't know if anyone, including even Durian Rider, including even people who profess to hate me, I don't know if anyone really doubts that very simple statement that I am doing this for the movement. And the interesting thing about that is when I get down to one-to-one interactions, when you're doing it for the movement, on the one hand, I can say this is not about you and it's not about me. And there's another sense in which it very intimately and passionately and directly, it is about you and it is about me. It's all about individuals. Because the movement, for me, isn't something real and actual that exists now. It's not even something I can critique as it currently exists in the world. Really, when I'm talking about the movement, I'm talking about the potential for something positive to happen in the future, right? And what is that potential? That potential comes down to little people like you and you and you and me sitting around thinking, what can we make happen in the next 10 years? Now, I'm gonna digress from this, the real topic of this video, for just 1 second to mention. In my earlier video, I stated, I think quite passionately and positively, that one of the great things we have to appreciate about this circus going on YouTube right now, this farce, as terrible and shameful as it may be to have a bunch of vegans throwing mud at each other, it's actually really wonderful that we're having an open-ended democratic debate, ultimately even about what the vegan movement itself should be. What are the goals? What are our means and methods, etc., etc.? And that's all being discussed now up front. It's not being discussed afterwards. I think there's a really interesting contrast to the failure of Occupy Wall Street. From my perspective, Occupy Wall Street was a failure. Occupy Wall Street brought people together at a protest and then had the debate about what the purpose of the protest was after the people have shown up. Right? This is their great assembly method. So people come to the protest and then there's an open-ended, endless debate about what it is they're protesting or what are the goals they're pursuing after they've already come to the protest. So to me, that's a formula for failure. No. Have those debates before you have the protest. The protest is the last and the least of your concerns. The protest should be an expression of and an affirmation of what it is you already have in common. It shouldn't be the start of a debate about, why are you protesting, right? Now, obviously, there are some people who disagree. There are some people who really feel that the purpose of the protest is exactly to start an ongoing and, I think, endless debate. The design of Occupy Wall Street was that they would never come to conclusions. They would never say, these are the goals of our movement, and if you don't support these goals, get out. And what's interesting about veganism is in some ways the ultimate single-issue cause. We actually have a long sequence of debates that are refining and redefining exactly what the objectives are of veganism and what methods we use and what we don't use. And the end of every discussion, the conclusion is ultimately, this is what veganism is, this is what veganism needs to become, and if you don't support it, get out. And some of those, some of those debates, they're not really hostile, but they do have to resolve questions of how multiple competing interests overlap within veganism. I can remember not too long ago, some people used to write to me, there used to be some discussion on the internet, saying that somehow veganism ought to co-opt or be co-opted by African-American civil rights movements. Now, even though that's sympathetic, even though many people who are vegans might also want to support the advancement of African-American people, ultimately, I think that debate had to end by recognizing these are really separate, profoundly separate issues. Okay? Veganism will never be a voice for the advancement of African American people, And even if you personally live in Georgia and your main form of activism is advancement of African American people, and you're also a vegan, I think those are ineluctably two separate movements. Sure, one may inspire the other, maybe in a poetic sense. An individual person may talk about how in their own life these things are connected, but we actually can't narrow the vegan movement by saying, no, vegans only consist of people who are passionate about this other political issue, because it really is other African American people. And this cannot become, as I've just alluded to, it cannot become an issue that says either you support this or you get out. Now, on the other hand, I've also talked about on this channel, there are all kinds of other hard limits. I've talked about, I think I'm still one of the only channels to talk about the fact that there are neo-Nazis, there are real fascists, there are real racists in veganism. I think that any vegan movement probably does have to have a hard minute where they say, look, if you're one of these crazy neo-Nazis, we don't want you in our movement, you have to get out. Even though they may be vegans, they may support animal rights, where you have hard limits and say, no, this doesn't overlap, this isn't acceptable, and so on. So, I mean, some of the other issues where I think fundamentally we're dealing with this same question. In politics, some people talk about this as siloing. Oh, and look, sorry, just to digress on that point a little bit further, keep in mind, a lot of people are just ultimately ethnocentric, Eurocentric, etc. If you think, because many people have written to me and talked to me, okay, not many, a few people memorably have written to me, really, who felt that the Black Lives Matter movement or other specific movements to the advancement of African American people, this was such a central, dominant, important issue, that the oppression of people of color in America was of such importance that how could I not redefine my channel to be about that rather than veganism? And, I did try to engage those people in Socratic dialogue, say, okay, is that a Cambodian perspective? How does that look from Cambodia? Because I'm actually interested in the future of veganism in Cambodia. Is that a Japanese perspective? I'm interested in the future of veganism in Japan. I now live in China. Is that a Yunnanese perspective? Like, I realize that from your perspective, the most important thing may be racial tensions in Atlanta, Georgia, or in Chicago. But I live in places in the world where nobody can pronounce Chicago, where nobody's heard of Atlanta. I'm sorry, they're not that famous, those cities here in Asia. Atlanta? They've heard of New York. What are you talking about? I know that to you that may seem like the center of the world. That may be where your passions lie as an activist, and I may completely sympathize, and I may want to hear about it. I may be really interested to talk to you and hear your perspective, but that's not veganism, and I can't allow that to redefine veganism nor to derail veganism. And I think those people, they don't think of themselves as derailing veganism, which is also completely understandable. They think they're doing something very positive when sometimes under the heading of intersectionalism, where they really do try to conflate two separate issues like that and then redefine veganism as subsidiary to one of these other political purposes, political causes. Okay. And now again, I'm also not saying that veganism should have a Japanocentric worldview or a Cambodia-centric worldview or a China-centric worldview. But hey, here in Asia, we're actually approaching veganism with a profoundly different set of concerns and cultural traditions and conflicts. If we're talking about the future of veganism, China is a big part of it. India is a big part of it. I've said that a million times. You underestimate the importance of Hinduism for the future of veganism. These are huge issues. And Chicago starts to look pretty small. Still interesting, still significant, but I know Chicago is the center of your world. It's not the center of the world. Easter Island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Easter Island is the center of the world, okay? There is no center of the world, is my point. All right. So it is also, I think, of some profound long-term significance that we have coming into veganism people who are more or less activists in addressing eating disorders and mental health issues, sometimes separately, sometimes this as the same thing. There are people who are just mental health advocates. There are people who are just eating disorder advocates. I dig it. And to a very real extent, I sympathize. Nobody who watched my first video ever dealing with anorexia and bulimia, something I guess you could say I delayed for a long time because those are big issues talked about so much in veganism. I finally made one video on that. I think it's over 20 minutes long. And nobody responded to that video thinking I was being unsympathetic or judgmental or harsh. I got some very interesting and meaningful email from individuals who themselves either anorexic or bulimic or both. talking about how meaningful it was to them. And again, that's the other interesting thing I was alluding to, is that in some ways veganism is just about talking to individuals, and in some ways it's not. In some ways it's not about me and it's not about you, and in some ways it's very meaningful to me getting those kinds of individual personal communications. Really brief digression, that I got an email this morning from someone who said he had a friend who was 95% vegan. So someone who was a reducitarian, but not involved with the movement, and someone who was obviously a little bit flexible, not really purely vegan. And this friend of his said to him, so this was a reducitarian talking to vegan, say, look, I agree with all the principles you're talking about as vegan, but why take it that far? And this guy, the vegan, who's a fan of my channel, sent the reducitarian the link to my video on community. And the reducitarian watched that video, and he said, I've completely changed my mind. Thank you. This convinced me. And he's now 100% vegan. And he's committed to both in his diet, being 100% vegan, not compromising, and also to seeing it as a political movement that he wants to participate in the future. So, wow. So to me, that is the kind of feedback that makes all of this worthwhile. You think, wow, somewhere out there, somewhere in Chicago, somewhere in Atlanta, Georgia, someone is really finding this useful. And again, when you do it for the movement, in a sense, it's not about me, it's not about you, but in a sense, it is about and it is for anyone who can make use of it. And it's very rewarding to find out there are individual people like that who are making use of it. And I got very positive feedback from that video dealing with anorexia and bulimia from people who sometimes even themselves struggle with disorders, who did find it useful, for whom they could make use. So that's interesting. I was expecting a lot of negative backlash in that video. So, and I didn't get it. Look, I know there are all these people who come into this movement with real passions of this kind, whether they're sincerely passionate about Black Lives Matter, or sincerely passionate about Occupy Wall Street, or sincerely passionate about anorexia, some other issue, and they get here and they think, why don't all you other vegans share my passions? Why isn't this the center of your world also? And I think they're not being destructive. They're not trying to disrupt the movement. They're not trying to do something negative towards veganism at all. I think for the most part they are unaware of the extent to which they're taking their own single issue cause and trying to make it into a make or break issue, into a barrier to entry, into something that redefines what the vegan movement is about. And I'm gonna, anyone who talks to me about this, whether it's by Skype or face to face, I am the one guy who's going to be honest to you. I am going to give it to you raw. Okay? Veganism is not about human rights. Veganism is not about better factory conditions for workers. It never will be. Okay? Veganism is not about helping African Americans deal with police brutality. It's not, and it never will be. Okay? And if you are an anorexic and you are an activist for anorexia, no matter how much I may sympathize with your struggle, I've got to tell you, veganism is not for you. Veganism is not about you. Veganism is not here to advance your single issue cause, expressed in terms of anorexia or mental health or advancing the rights of people with these kinds of disorders. It's not. Okay? All kinds of other people are going to politely avoid the issue or just pretend that we're all in the same boat or what have you. But it is really interesting to me to what extent anorexia, I think right now, probably anorexia is the single most disruptive issue within veganism. There's a much greater degree of, anorexics feeling entitled to talk as if veganism is for them and about them, and to castigate me in contrast to any of those other issues. Because, like the far left-wingers, Occupy Wall Street people, or people who are actually communists, they do write to me. They do. There are people who write to me and sincerely say that my form of veganism is immoral and invalid because it's not about the upliftment of the workers, because it's not about factory conditions or labor conditions on farms or something. And none of those conversations have gone very far. Those are generally people who came into veganism already with this criterion that veganism has to live up to, otherwise it's invalid. In the same way, I have people who come into veganism because for them, I think on a profound level, personally more than politically, veganism is linked to their own struggle with eating disorders. And basically their perspective is that because my version of veganism is not all about them, is not all about what's at the center of their world, that my version of veganism is not valid. So let's hear one example of this. And I'm going to basically talk about why I'm not responding to this kind of criticism from the small number of anorexics who are basically offended that my channel exists. As mentioned, look, you guys all know this. This is not a secret. You guys know I'm good friends with the Vegan Lass. Vegan Lass changed her name to Lauren Phoenix, so she's known as both Lauren Phoenix. Everyone knows that. Lauren Phoenix did a long podcast with me, and since then, we've never been out of touch. I'm better friends with Lauren Phoenix than any other YouTube vegan, probably. Some people are going to get insulted now. Some emails. I thought we were good friends. Me and Lauren were not that close. I'm not that close to any of y'all. But anyway, just saying, so Lauren, is anorexic, and she doesn't find my position on these issues so rebarbative as to be offensive. I think Lauren, I think she really speaks from the position that, the role of anorexics within veganism is really fraught with special difficulties. I think all her videos reflected that. Okay, I'm not going to get into that. But I mean, Lauren's perspective, I think Lauren, from her very first encounter with veganism, recognized, on the one hand, veganism is not a cure for anorexia, and veganism is not about anorexics. And if anything, anorexics, especially if you're an anorexic still in recovery, they have a lot of special hurdles and obstacles in terms of, becoming and sustaining a vegan lifestyle, and then, taking on a leadership role in the movement. So I just think, what can I tell you? Lauren, I mean, she ain't dumb. But also, Lauren, when she disagrees with me, I think she's just strong enough to disagree with me and not hate my guts for it. So anyway, enough disclaimers.
The same thing. What a load of crap. You do not really understand what mental illness really is. Mental illness is not a choice, and you in the past have actually slammed people like Durian Rider for claiming these things and made videos against them. Yet,
okay, so this is the problem we get into. Would I even debate with somebody like this, a claim like this, which is so radically unrelated to what I actually said in my own video? So his method of attack or critique of me is to claim that I am making the same mistake Durian Rider made, that I am claiming that mental illness is a choice. And in the video he's referring to, in the Insanity in Politics video, let's start the title, not only does that video contain its own critique of Durian Rider, I have many videos, as you just said, disagree with Durian Rider. That criticism is so far off base, from my perspective, it's beneath contempt, and it's not worth replying to. But specifically, the video he's characterized as this view also says the exact opposite of the view. So let me just quote 3 seconds of myself talking from the same video. I mean, if you are born with a mental disability, I know it's unpopular and it's insulting and crude to call that person stupid. If you're talking about someone who is not capable of thinking rationally because they have an emotional disability or an intellectual disability or a serious psychological disorder like schizophrenia. Nobody wants to be insulting because we know it's not a choice. We know they didn't choose to be this way. Okay, so his claim is that I stated the exact opposite of what I stated in the video. So even within that one video, I stated it is not a choice. That I do not believe it's a choice to have schizophrenia, right? And it specifically says nobody wants to criticize a schizophrenic for being stupid or wrong because we regard them as being impaired in a way that they didn't choose, right? And this guy, who is an anorexic, currently in recovery, or not yet recovered, whatever you want to say, he is criticizing me, from my perspective, basically by lying, by claiming that my argument in this video is 180 degrees opposite to what it was, right? So this is the first problem, is that this actual argument, I think, is not worth responding to. No, I don't say anything like that. And if it was anyone else, I mean, in politics all the time, people intentionally misrepresent what you had to say. This guy isn't doing that. I think he is a combination of stupid enough and crazy enough and emotionally disturbed enough that he actually believes this is true. He believes that in this video, I'm stating the exact opposite of what I say. But that's not a debate I want to have. But the other problem is exactly what I just said in what I just quoted from myself saying the earlier video. I don't want to get into a debate with a guy who is obviously mentally unwell and physically unwell, in which I, for example, call him stupid. I don't want to do that. I mean, in politics, nothing could be worse than this situation. This guy not only currently is suffering with anorexia, when he talks about that openly, okay, great, so that's the direction he's taking his channel in. Less than 1 month ago, he attempted suicide because of some cruel remarks that were made by another person on YouTube about him. Someone criticized him, as he says, criticized his character. Now, the version of events I got from him, and other people, of course, talked about it, was that his wife called emergency services, his wife called an ambulance or something. He says that he relapsed, so he was relapsing into anorexia. He had some kind of mental breakdown. I do not know if he actually attempted suicide, but that was based even what he said and what other people told me, and that his wife had to call emergency. He had some kind of really extreme emotional breakdown in response to someone else, shall we say, criticizing him, perhaps also ridiculing him, here in the vegan demi-monde, right? Now, I'm the last person to defend the other guy, who we're not even going to name, the other guy who criticized him, who made these insulting remarks. Of course, that's bad. In my earlier video, I really pointed out, this is not flag football. I basically have two fundamental reasons why people with these kinds of serious intellectual impairments, serious emotional disorders, serious intellectual disorders, serious mental disorders should not be involved in vegan politics. And one of them is that it's not safe for them. The same kind of ridicule or criticism that caused one person to attempt suicide, or at least his wife called emergency services and he relapsed into anorexia and he had serious medical and physical results, someone else would laugh off or shrug off or make a response to or debate, right? I can't do that with you. With this guy who's an anorexic and who's wanting to bring the fight to me, and again, in terms of politics, he's fighting dirty. He's straight up lying about what my video says and what it doesn't say. So if this was Happy Healthy Vegan, you guys see how I replied to Happy Healthy Vegan. If this was Jeff Nelson, you've seen a couple of videos where I really bring the debate back to him. None of those people even replied. How many times have I ever had a debate? You've seen how I debated with a natural being. Okay, you want to lie about what my position is on castration of dogs? You want to misrepresent what I say on my channel? Okay, let's have the debate. And like real politics, because for me, veganism is real politics, those can be pretty nasty and insulting confrontations. I don't want to do that with somebody. I'm not willing to do that with somebody who is overtly suffering from such a serious mental and physical illness. Within the last month, to my knowledge, maybe more, this guy attempted suicide because someone else criticized him. He had serious mental, emotional, and physical problems, ailments suffered because someone else. So what, do you think I'm now going to roll up my sleeves and take apart this video and say, no, how dare you, you misunderstood my argument, you're lying about what my argument is, you're misrepresenting me? Do you think I'm going to get into that kind of debate with you? No. It's not going to happen, right? Now, maybe it should. Maybe if your view of, human equality with people who have these kinds of serious mental, maybe it should. I referred to in my earlier video, disputes I had, a long time ago I talked about this, disputes I had with Pal Simeon. When I first got to know Pal Simeon and I first had dialogue with him, I didn't know he had any diagnosed serious mental disorders. Now, to my knowledge, he has extremely serious mental disorders, and apparently he has deleted his whole channel, right? If you go to his channel now, it's a list of, it's a blank screen. I don't know if that's permanent. I don't know if he'll come back. I also don't know if he did that in response to my video. It is very possible he did, because that video, the two videos, the one on anorexia and bulimia and the one on insanity and politics, they do give the advice, look, I think this is going to have negative consequences to your life if you have this kind of serious disorder. And this guy with anorexia is an example of that. The other guy who stabbed himself on camera or attempted suicide with a knife on camera is another example of that. And I've already explained at length, I do actually think Pal Simeon is an example of that. If you look at the good and the bad impacts this movement and being on YouTube has had in his life, there's a lot of bad, and I don't know, maybe there's some good. There's some good, but he's putting himself at risk. It's not safe for him the way it is for someone else. Now, again, in my earlier video, Insanity and Politics, I said, look, this is not flag football. This is politics. This game is not for everyone. I would even go on to say, though, flag football is not for everyone. I think, what if you're a coach? What if you're a coach on a football team, like not a serious, and there's a kid who wants to play the sport, but this kid has a serious mental disorder. Let's say the kid is schizophrenic, is diagnosed with schizophrenia, and you realize, look, if the other kids lose a game, or if the other kids get taunted, if the other kids have something emotionally bad happen, like the coach yells at them, or the players in the other team insult them or taunt them, maybe some of the kids are going to get upset, maybe they're going to cry, some of the kids are going to laugh at it, some of the kids are just going to play the game back and return the insults, some of the kids will maybe even sometimes benefit from the tough love of sports, right? But you think, wait, here's a kid with a serious, let's say either a serious mental disability or serious mental disorder or serious emotional problem. And you say, for this kid, apart from, because this is the second category, the first category is, if this kid plays this sport, is it going to be good or bad for this kid? Right? And the second question is this going to be good or bad for the team? And ultimately, that's the same question I've got to ask about veganism. And what I've said unapologetically, and I think I explained it very well in 2 videos, between the 2 of them, it's more than half an hour of talking, right? Look, the reason why I gave this young woman who was a bulimic, who has serious diagnosed bulimia, is in and out of hospital for bulimia treatment, I said to her, for her to get involved in veganism the same way I am, with YouTube as her main platform, I think it's a bad idea for her. Now, there was a lot more nuance to that. I said, look, maybe 10 years from now, maybe 20 years from now, you can do it. But right now, you're still in and out of the hospital. You don't have your career sorted out. You don't have a lot of other things. Right now, I think this is a really bad thing for you. And you know what? She agreed. It was totally possible. She could have written back saying, how dare you? You're trying to silence me. You don't value my voice in the vegan movement. I think she completely got it, that the advice I was giving her had to do with real concern for her and the kind of damage she would endure psychologically and even economically and what have you if she came on and played the same game I play by the same rules, right? So she got it. Not everybody gets it. Some people respond as if I'm trying to shut down or kick out anorexics from the movement, and I'm not, but I'm being honest about that kind of warning. And yes, so as I say, there's a question of, is it good for you? Is it good for the particular guy suffering with anorexia? This particular guy suffering with anorexia criticized me now less than a month ago. He apparently attempted suicide. He had mental breakdown. He had a relapse because of this. So what are you going to do? You're going to start a debate with me now, and I'm going to call you an idiot on camera? No. We can't. Again, there's this question of, if you let a kid onto the football team who has a serious mental disability of any kind, for whatever reason, again, because one of the things I'm talking about here is the danger is the same. Yes, there are all these different disorders. Having bulimia is totally different from having schizophrenia. Having schizophrenia is totally different from being born severely mentally retarded or what have you, They're different. But you're the coach on the team, and you're looking at this kid and thinking, well, what? Is this good or bad for the kid? Is this good or bad for the team? What do you expect the other team to do? How do you expect them to play the game? Do you expect them to go soft on the one kid who may really be more hurt? Again, we're really just talking about emotionally, what have you. Yeah, I think the idea that we can all play this game, the rough and tumble of this game as equals, it's a dream. And all the videos alluded to the fact that, look, I think there's a really meaningful question of how do we organize a compassionate society and a compassionate political movement? How do we, to whatever extent, recognize each other and cooperate despite the shortcomings we may have? In earlier videos, I used other examples too, which, whether or not it has stigma. What if you have someone in your movement who's addicted to gambling? What if you have someone in your movement who's addicted to cocaine? But, someone who's an addicted gambler, maybe they're still a principled vegan, but they can't play the same role in the movement as somebody else. They can't be trusted with financial transactions, maybe. All politics is like this. For me, again, I've already explained this in this video, but for me, the ultimate question is, okay, beautiful thing about YouTube is we get to have this debate now, and we get to have it much more openly and much more honestly than we ever were able to do in any other political movement in the history of the world. Okay? And if you want to state your opinion that you think anorexics, current anorexics, people in and out of the hospital with anorexia now, people who are really seriously physically fragile and really seriously emotionally fragile, can play this game or can play a leadership role in the movement, okay, I'm willing to listen to your opinion. But here's my opinion by contrast, and I hope some people are willing to listen to it too. If all of us, this bunch of eccentrics on YouTube talking about the future of veganism, if all of us are abandoned on a desert island, and then we got to pick who is going to be a police officer, is it going to be you? The qualities you need to be a police officer in terms of a certain kind of reliability, a certain kind of down-to-earth attitude, it's limited. You don't have to be brilliant. You know, I've heard some police recruiting agencies actually try to avoid cops who are too intelligent, because if they're too intelligent, they'll get bored of the job. That's a rumor. I've never seen that documented in terms of political analysis or political publication. Not everyone can be a police officer. Someone who is currently suffering with anorexia, physically, emotionally, intellectually, is in no condition to be a police officer. And you might even say, apart from the question of whether or not it's good for the criminals, whether or not it's good for the community, whether or not it's good for society as a whole, it's a very simple question to ask. Is it even good for this guy or this woman, for this anorexic person, for them to take on the role of being a police officer? Because ultimately, I alluded to this really briefly in the earlier video, nobody knows if they've got what it takes. I've had some people in my life, people who knew me personally, and sometimes just police officers who knew me this much, say to me that they thought I would make a great police officer. And they often said why, what qualities I had that made them think I would be a great police officer. And, I was very skeptical. I said back, yeah, but I'm also this kind of guy. I have different characters that I think would make me a lousy police officer. I think in many ways, you'll never know until you try. I think there's a sense in which we're finding out. We're finding out whether the knife is dull or sharp by cutting bread with it. I think in a lot of ways, and I've heard many interviews with people who are in the police services and who basically went crazy, who, lost their composure, had emotional breakdowns, had some kind of crisis, and had to retire from police services due to emotional meltdowns, breakdowns, what have you. I don't know. And, very interesting stories, by the way, of what brought them to that point. They didn't know that about themselves, and obviously the people hiring them didn't know that about themselves. There's a sense in which you don't know. But no, if we're on a desert island, if we're looking around at these people, if we're choosing who even has the kind of reliability necessary to be a police officer, it is not going to be someone who is diagnosed with schizophrenia. It is not going to be someone who is so physically and emotionally frail right now that they're in and out of hospital for anorexia treatment. There are people who recover from anorexia and go on to have, careers and all kinds of paths. But we're talking about people who are currently, struggling to feed themselves and to deal with all of the associated intellectual and emotional problems with anorexia. Okay? Now ask yourself, what we're talking about doing here in vegan politics, do you think it's a higher or a lower standard than filling out speeding tickets for cars on the highway? I think this is actually much more demanding. I think the level of performance we're looking for from people is many, many times higher. So why even make excuses for people who could not fill a role such as being a police officer and say, no, these people can be and should be leaders in veganism as a political movement? I guess to close, that's maybe the sense in which, although I've said so many good things about YouTube, I think it's wonderful we're having this debate. I think it's wonderful that YouTube gives a voice to people like Durian Rider. At one time, Durian Rider was just an eccentric guy who worked in a bicycle shop repairing bicycles, and nobody cared what his opinion was. And he was a guy who, by his own account, was diagnosed with serious mental disorders, including schizophrenia. That's his account of his own life. It's not something I'm ascribing to him. And in a sense, it's kind of beautiful that somebody like that can find their audience and find their voice and be heard and felt appreciated in the world. I think that is wonderful. But it also can lure us into a false sense of confidence in these people. It can lure us into trusting them too much when they are not trustworthy. And when, as I've said repeatedly under this heading, these people may be a danger. They may be a danger to themselves. They may be a danger to others. And just by us putting them on, just by us giving them that little bit of fame, just by us putting them in that leadership position, we may actually be enabling them to engage in that kind of behavior that is, again, fundamentally bad for them, bad for the movement, bad for both teams, and also maybe bad for the kids on the field playing the sport.